We're going to start again, try again. This is Parsha Noach. Before we begin, the thing to consider is a comment that Yeshua made in Matthew 24:37. He says, "As the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." So, be interesting to know what it was actually like in the days of Noah. And you can't actually, you can't talk about the days of Noah without mentioning the Nephilim. Nephilim, which comes from the Hebrew Nephal, which means to fall. Nephilim meaning the fallen ones. It's a reference to, it's not biblical, the book of Enoch, but it is referenced, I believe, in the scriptures, possibly in Jude, and Enoch himself is mentioned. The book does tally in with some of the Genesis accounts, so we can take some things from it, but it's not scripture. If we read Enoch, it tells of a tale of 200 angels known as watchers who come down and congregate on Mount Hermon. Hermon's another word for contract. There, these 200 angels contracted to enter into something that was so heinous they obviously didn't want to do it by themselves, and that was for them to go and take their pleasure with the daughters of men. Now, they realised they'd done something really terrible, and according to the book of Enoch, it's quite ridiculous really. It's a bit like naughty kids in the headmaster. They wrote a letter and they asked Enoch to pass it to Jehovah for them. It was a letter apologising and saying, "Will you please let us off, we're really sorry." Apparently Enoch did, and Jehovah said no, and gave him a judgment, and the judgment was that they'd watch their offspring kill themselves, and then they'd be cast in chains of darkness and kept until judgment. Now, it's believed, if you read some sources, that the first generation of their offspring were 450 feet tall, 450 foot tall, part man, part angel mix, and they killed each other. I think these are what a reference when you hear the tales from the Greeks when they talk about the Titans and the likes of this. They had other offspring as well, and basically what they were about doing was corrupting the gene pool. If you remember in Genesis, it says in the scripture, it says, and the Lord had things to go after their kind. They started messing about with this, mixing it all up, which is actually where you get a lot of your legends from things. For example, like the myths of the Minotaur, which has got the body of a man and the head of a bull. Satyrs, which are half man, half ghost. Centaur, which is man, horse, and Griffin, which is an eagle, a lion. In fact, in scripture itself, there's actually mention of lion people. If we look at 1 Chronicles 11:22, it says, "Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel, who had done many acts, he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. Also he went down and slew a lion in a pit in a snowy day." Okay, so lion-like men sound quite scary. What was going on? Right, was an enemy who wanted to corrupt the DNA. Now, if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because in Genesis, the Lord spoke to the serpent and said, "The seed of the woman will crush the head of your seed." So if he can corrupt the seed, he can actually stop this from being the case. So there was an enemy out there that was trying to corrupt the DNA. I would say that there's an enemy out there now, just as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man, who's trying to corrupt the DNA yet again. And that's where we get things from GMO foods, otherwise known as Franken foods. So corrupt the DNA, and what you're doing, you're defacing the image of God. You can see what this is all coming from. Now, as I said before, you add in this Greek mythology, this reference to these things which are half man, half this, that and the other, and actually this great crime against the divine order of things, which is kind after its kind. And as it was in the days of Noah, so it is today, because we now have things which are ridiculous, like spider goats, which quite a terrifying thought. See, to recognise that spider silk is extremely strong and it's extremely light. And wouldn't it be brilliant if we could make things out of spider silk? But you know, if you had to have a spider farm, well, it'd be a really scary, a really scary place to be. But because I don't like spiders. Not that so much, it's the fact that how do you actually go about milking enough silk off spiders to do anything particularly useful with. So what they've done is they've mixed up the genes of a goat and the genes of a spider, and they now have goats that they can milk for spider silk. It's quite ridiculous. And then we've got reports of 150 human/animal chimeras in labs in Britain, and that was reported in a national newspaper, which makes you realise that if that's what they're telling you about, there must be a hell of a lot more going on that we don't know about. Other things of interest are an international school of law was given $770,000 to work on the ethical code regarding people who are only partially human entities. Obviously, human rights, do they apply to somebody who's part human, part lion, for example? We've got nations talking about how conduct and warfare should be carried out with regards to, it's all to do with regarding super soldiers, which are obviously something that goes against the divine order of things again, to create people specifically to be soldiers. There's a documentary actually called Madness on the Motorway, which is quite bizarre. It was actually shown on British television, and you can get it on YouTube, and it shows two women who went a little bit crazy on a motorway. One bit of footage shows you a woman getting run over by an articulated lorry. She runs out in front of it, and she ends up, you see her underneath the wheels, and then a couple of minutes later she's up and she's fighting with 6 police officers, and actually she nearly overpowers them. Obviously something strange going on. Now, what it is this whole idea of super soldiers and people with these special powers. Actually, we see that all the way through the 20th century culture. We've got Spider-Man, we've got Batman. It's like they're being people are being programmed to accept these things. X-Men with special powers. Ooh. It's a great thing. Ooh, look at this. Well, there's this thing called transhumanism. There's people who have this belief that actually what we need to do now is to improve ourselves. Transhumanism, H plus as in human plus. Now, I do go on to talk about this in the next bit, so I don't know where this cuts off. But there was one particular interview that I found quite horrific, which was a woman who was discussing how marvellous it would be to have a body designed by Versace. Do these people actually believe that we have the power now to create ourselves in whatever image we want? Obviously, Jehovah's plan is that we are made in his image. So, as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Everything that was going on then, we can actually see happening today. Even if you'd have spoken about some of this stuff, say 20 years ago, people would have thought, oh, don't be silly. But actually, for national newspapers to be reporting, for example, human-animal chimeras, that's really quite bizarre. And the thing is as well, because people have been programmed as such, there isn't actually a great big fuss made about it. It's not actually horrifying people or freaking people out. Everybody seems to be quite fine about it. Another thing I noticed as well was in London there's a place which is the leading proponents in the study of forensics, and they've actually introduced as part of their training a whole section which is to do with regarding a crime scene where a crime might have been perpetrated by somebody who's not fully human. Particularly bizarre. Now it's going to do like a special effect thing, and I'm going to appear somewhere else, there's a bit I missed out. Get there in the end. What's happening now is an integration of technology into mankind. All talks of it, and obviously steps will have probably been made. Ideas such as interfacing with the World Wide Web, and there's this whole idea of using nanotechnology to increase our brain capacity to a ridiculous point where it becomes exponentially more and more incredible, and it reaches this place called the Omega point. And the age-old lie, we become as gods. So that's another thing to watch out for. But it's the same lie that was seeded in the Garden of Eden. It's just ridiculous that people think they're close to it now, and the arrogance of some people is quite remarkable. And that'll do for now. I've seen this one guy who's quite scary in his own right, who actually, have you seen him with the grey beard and a very somber face, who says, "We will be gods." Have you seen him?
If anybody tries to stop me becoming a god, there will be trouble.
Yeah, okay. Now, the serpent's message to man was, and it still is, God does not really communicate his will to you. In other words, did God truly say? You don't need God. In other words, you shall surely not die. You can't trust God, as in God knows the day you eat of it. Your eyes will be opened, and you can't get what you really want from God. In other words, do this and you'll be his God. Now, it's the same lie that he's spinning today. A little word about Noah. His name, we get told, just means rest and comfort, but it's a little bit more to it. It means to bring something that is moving to a condition of rest, to cause something noisy to become quiet, to set something down after having picked it up and moved it. All sounds a bit flood-like, doesn't it? It's all related. To remove something from a crowded place where its essence is hidden and put it in a solitary place where it can be displayed. It's all kind of like a picture of the flood, isn't it, in his name? Now, another thing that we have to bear in mind is something must have been special about Noah, because the Lord, it says, he found grace in the Lord's eyes, or in the scriptures sometimes it says found favour. Now, this is long before Yeshua came along, and we're talking about grace. This is long before he was born in a sukkah in Bethlehem. So, what was it about? Basically, grace is not a New Testament thing. It's all the way through the Torah. And we want to see, obviously, well, how did he get grace? Scriptures tell us it was because he was found righteous. So, what does it mean to be righteous? Because if you think about it, if it's going to be like the days in Noah when the Son of Man comes, I want to be like Noah. I don't want to be like the rest of them who ended up having a long swim. So what was it about him? It was the fact that he was righteous. Righteous, what does it mean? It's just a word. What is it? It says, scripturally, it's just. It means to be just, and it means to be lawful. Two scriptures. Deuteronomy 6:25, which I think is up there, yeah. It says, "And it shall be our righteousness if we observe to do all these commandments before the Lord our God, as he hath commanded us." Aha! Keep the commandments. Psalm 119:138, "Thy testimonies that thou hast commanded are righteous and very faithful." Brilliant. Let's look at some other people. Abraham, let's have a look at him. Genesis 15:6. "He believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness." Okay, so we just have to believe. Is that what it means? Hang on, there's something different going on in the Hebrew concept. It's completely different. Abraham did what Jehovah asked of him. He trusted and he obeyed. Good grief, did he obey? Think about it. I want you to get up. I want you to leave everything you've ever known and travel somewhere. I'm not even going to tell you where it is. Just do it, please. Okay? He trusted, he obeyed, he had faith. Because we know that faith without works is dead, as it tells us in James 2:17. Now, For those who are a bit confused about righteousness and think it all changed and the rules all changed when Yeshua came along, they might quote Romans 10:4, which says this. It says, "For Christ is the end of the law, for righteousness to everyone that believeth." Okay, Christ is the end of the Torah, for righteousness to everyone that believeth. That's good, isn't it? Okay, what's going on? What on earth is going on? Well, the word translated as end is telos in Greek. It appears again in the same book a little bit earlier in Romans 6:22. It says, "But now, being made free from sin and become servants to God, ye have your fruit unto holiness, and the end everlasting life." Oh, okay. So actually, this word means the result, the consequence, the goal. So actually the scripture is saying Christ is the ultimate, or he's the goal of the Torah for righteousness to everyone that believes. As Abraham believed, which is to shema, which is to trust and to obey. Obedience is linked with faith. People just have this idea that, oh yeah, no, it's obedience. Everything about the Hebrew mindset is about doing things. Every word has a verb root. It's all about what you do. It's not about what you think. Now 1 John 3:7 says this, "Little children, let no man deceive you. He that doeth righteousness," in other words, get busy. "He that doeth righteousness, even as he is righteous, even as he is righteous." In other words, don't just rely on Yeshua's righteousness. It's him who practices righteousness, who's righteous like Yeshua is righteous. Now, as we go into this, I want you to bear in mind that when we read these scriptures, we're reading from Jehovah's perspective on things, and this is the same God who wrote, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." totally understated. So don't let anything just wash over you. Just because it hasn't got a big fanfare and a song and dance about it, doesn't mean that it's not important. So even that last verse, when it says, "Don't be deceived," it's him who practices righteousness, who is righteous as he is righteous. Just because there's not a big song and dance about the verse and everything, actually, it doesn't have to be. This is the word of God. It states it, it's the truth. It stands on its own merit. So as we go into Genesis 6, just bear it in mind. We'll start with verse 9. It says, "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God." Right? People say that this is telling us that whereas the whole world was having its DNA corrupted, genetics were all going nonsensical, actually Noah was okay and his gene pool was fine, and that's what that's what the Lord was interested in. Which is an interesting argument, and there might be some truth in it. But if we break it down a bit, Noah's righteousness, he was a Siddiq, that's the Hebrew word, and it doesn't mean he was sinless, right? This whole idea that he was perfect, no. It means he was justified through faith. Yeah, again, it's grace, isn't it? Yeah, grace or hen, which, bear in mind, is a covenant term. It only applies to people who are in covenant with the Lord. If you're outside of this covenant, it doesn't apply to you. Are you with me? So it's not a case of, I'm under grace, I'm not under the law. Hang on a minute. You're either in the covenant and you can have grace because it's a part of the covenant, or you're outside of the covenant and this grace does not apply to you. Now, the word that we've got as perfect is tamim, and the root word tamam means totally utilised. So if you put your foot down full on your car and it's going full steam ahead, that means your car's tamam. So the word we've got here is perfect. It means fully utilised. So basically the scriptures is saying that Noah worshipped the Lord God with all of his heart, all of his soul, and all of his mind. Everything was fully utilised. Now, it also says that he walked with God, and I love this word for walk. The verb root is halak. Yeah, I've got it up there. Three letters that make up the word halak. Hey, which is a man with his arms raised to reveal. Yeah. Lamed, which is a shepherd's staff, which represents to teach. And kaf, which is an open palm, which means
allow, it means to tame, to bend to another's will. So this whole idea of walking with God is by revelation, right? To be taught, and as you're taught, to be led, to be tamed, and to bend to His will. That's what it means to walk with the Lord. Now, it also means doing whatever He does, because Yeshua said, doesn't He? He says, I only do what I see my Father doing. That means surrender your own self-will. Now, to walk with the Lord is the easiest thing to do, but it's also the hardest thing to do as well, isn't it? Because we're all very willful. But we need to learn to bow. Now, I think some people are dead mean to know it, I think. If you think about it, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Noah. And some of the ancient sages, I love saying that, some of the ancient sages say this, they say, Noah was not as righteous as Abraham or Moses, was he? No, and go, oh, it's because he got drunk later. It's not even that. They say that when Abraham, right, was faced with the idea of Sodom and Gomorrah, he begged the Lord and said, no, don't do it, don't do it. Moses had a similar event going on when the Lord said to Moses, I'm going to kill a lot of them. Moses said, no, don't do it, don't do it. But what did Noah do? Oh, okay. So they reckon he wasn't as righteous as the other two. I think that's a bit mean. Verse 10 says, and Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Right? Corrupt comes from the Hebrew verb root shakat, or shokat. And it's a connotation of decadence, perversion, destruction, damage. And it's usually in reference to sexual immorality and idolatry. But the whole idea of this corruption is that it's destructive, completely destructive. So actually men would destroy in the earth with this corruption. Now, when it says violence as well, this is quite interesting. The word used is Hamas, right? Which Strong's identifies not only with violence but with cruelty, oppression and injustice. Have you heard the name Hamas before? Yeah. Right. And the word to say it's filled is more like, but it doesn't just mean filled, it means filled to the brim so you can't get any more in. So effectively what it's saying is that man, acting independent of Jehovah, destroyed the earth. And the earth was absolutely full to the brim of corruption and oppression and cruelty. So actually Jehovah's intervention was an act of grace, which it often isn't seen as. Verse 13 says, and God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. I just had a little think here and thought, how do you deal with that? It's not like he can go and see his pastor, is it, or something, or look up a teaching on the internet. What do you do when the Lord says he's going to destroy the whole earth and everything? What was he sitting there thinking? What? I mean, I don't know how he reacted. And then he says to him, make thee an ark of gopher wood, rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and thou shalt pitch it within, pitch it without the pitch. I said that wrong, but there you go. Gopher wood is actually believed to be cedar wood, which is also believed to be the wood of the cross. Now, that's interesting because a lot of people actually say that the ark is a picture of our Messiah. Now, verse 10 it says, and this is the fashion which thou shalt make of it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above, and the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. Right, effectively the ark was 450 foot long, 70 foot wide, and 35 foot tall. That's massive, isn't it? Some people actually say it's too big to build that. It's a lot big to build. But if we go back in time, things generally get more impressive, don't they? You think about it, the pyramids. If I was to describe the pyramids, and nobody'd ever seen them to be like, shut up, yeah, as if. Don't be stupid. What, and there's little chambers in it and everything like that, and they all come to the stars. Yeah, you're mad. Actually, hang on. Things were more impressive back then. There's the megalithic stones, there's the walls at Sasha's room in Peru, where the stones are actually 2,000 tons each, and they're put together ridiculously well, so you can't actually get a razor blade between them. They knew how to do things back then that we don't know how to do anymore. Now, note that Jehovah doesn't begin, by the way, by telling Noah that there's going to be a flood. What he does is he says, all I want you to do is to build an ark. Noah doesn't say, hey, hang on a minute, why? Why did you want me to build a 450-foot boat? Come on. He doesn't, does he? He could have at any point there gone, whoa, you must think I'm mad. Come on, I'm not doing it. Well, if you tell me why, maybe then he doesn't. He just sits there and okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll build a 450-foot boat. Okay. Now that's faith, isn't it? See, you shouldn't, if the Lord tells you to do something, you shouldn't ask him why. You should just, like a child, have that faith that says, well, if you said to do it, it must be good. I'll do it. And he's not asking us to build 450-foot boats, is he? Is he? I don't think he is, anyway. But what comes next? Because he had faith, then the Lord explains to him. Because he says in verse 27, behold, even I do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives, and thee. Right? Covenant is not just a promise. It's a lot deeper than that. It's a spiritual union, and it's eternal. It's binding in every way, legally, morally, and spiritually and ethically. Every single way it's binding. And we just have this attitude in the West. Oh, covenant. We've got no clue what a covenant is. Now, if you make a covenant with Jehovah, right, it's life-changing. It affects everything about your life. Just as this covenant was made here. Can you imagine how Noah's life was turned around? One minute he's making, I believe he used to make farming implements to make farming easier. The next minute he's having a discussion with his wife about building a 450-foot boat. Things change when you make a covenant with the Lord. Everything changes. His whole life became different, and it should be the same with us. Now, when a covenant used to be made in the old days, what they'd do is they'd get an animal and cut it to pieces, and they'd stick bits of the animal, make a walkway, and the blood would flow. And the two people would walk through where these animals have been severed, and the covenant would basically symbolise, right, if you faff up this, may it be that you end up like these animals. They took it very, very seriously. A covenant is not something that you entered into glibly. So when we entered into covenant with our God, but to bear this in mind, this isn't something glib, and just bear in mind what our covenant was sealed with. It wasn't sealed with the blood of lambs and pigs and whatever. Not to be pigs, it was sealed with the blood of the Messiah, which is even more serious. Also, did you notice that his family got to be saved as well? It's good, isn't it? So we should ask on behalf of our families as well. Now, verse 19 says, and of every living thing of all flesh, two of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark to keep them alive with thee. And they shall be male and female, and fowls after their kind, and of the cattle after their kind. See, after their kind, none of this transgenics. It says, and every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, two of every sort shall come unto thee to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee of all the flood that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. Right? The Lord brings to you those that he wills. These animals came in thee. The Lord does bring to you those that he wills. Now, we have to feed them with what it is that the Lord provides us to feed those that he brings to us with. Are you with me? That's how it works. Now, verse 22 says, thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so he did. That's faith. He did everything that the Lord told him to. In Hebrews 11:7 it says, by faith Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, as you probably would be, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. So, he had a secret, didn't he, to his deliverance, and that of his family. It's that he did, according to all that God instructed him. That was his secret. And the word in Hebrew is asar. And we've had this before, and it doesn't mean to just do. It actually means the word means to interact with raw material, like a potter interacts with clay, and to make something of it. It means to make visible and tangible something that is only thought or spoken or believed. So where to do that with the words that we're presented with? When we see the word of God, we're to make the word of God into something tangible in our lives. That's what it means to us all. So what did Noah do? Well, he didn't build his own idea, did he? He didn't build his own thing. He did according to what the Lord said, and he also waited till the Lord initiated it. He responded to the instructions that he got from Moses. He yielded. But today people don't do it. They just go about doing their own thing and expect the Lord to bless it. We see that in churches up and down the land, don't we? Oh, I've started this new program, and what we're going to do is we're going to have the tambourine, we're going to dance down the street. Look, the playing of the Lord will bless you. And the Lord's probably scratching his head. What do they do? Right, we'll have a quick look at the word before the flood. There was no rain. I've looked at this. From what I'm pretty sure this is right, there was no seasons. The air was more oxygenated and the air pressure was different. And we get this from things like air bubbles and amber. Now, if you go scrolling down, is it up there? No. I'll read this bit out. This is from a science journal. Oh, it is up there. That's good, isn't it? It says oh no, that's the next one. It's okay. This one says, the analysis of microscopic air bubbles trapped in fossilised tree resin gave Robert Bernard of Yale and Gary Landis of the US Geological Survey a glimpse into the ancient past. The researchers clamped the amber into a vacuum chamber of a quadruple mass spectrometer. Oh, I wish I had one of them. A device that identifies the chemical composition of the substance. As the machine slowly crushed the sample, the microscopic bubbles were released, exhaling up to 100 billion molecules. These breaths disclosed some surprising evidence. The ancient air contained 50% more oxygen than the air today. Landis believes that the reduction in oxygen could have led to the dinosaurs' demise. Other studies of air bubbles in amber have found increased pressure as well as greater oxygen levels. One implication is that the atmospheric pressure of the Earth would have been much greater during the Cretaceous era, pre-flood era, when the bubbles formed in the resin. Now, a dense atmosphere could also explain how the ungainly pterosaur, with its stubby, it sounds lovely, doesn't it, with its stubby body and wingspan of up to 11 metres, could have stayed airborne. I've got a horrible picture of this thing in here. Sorry. Other things to bear in mind, there was an Apatosaurus, some people call it a Brontosaurus. Huge! Have you seen them? You've seen Jurassic Park, I mean, they were massive. They had nostrils the size of a horse. How did that get enough oxygen in if the oxygen, you know what I mean, if the air wasn't richer? Nostrils the size of a horse, and it's like bigger than this building. Right, now, they have things around now, mostly in America, called hyperbaric chambers. They stick athletes in them, and what these chambers do is they simulate these conditions. There's more oxygen and the air pressure is increased, and the athletes heal 4 times faster, which is quite bizarre, isn't it? Now, one commentator says this, I find this hard to believe, but it might be true, that the air was that rich that a man could run for 250 miles at a sprint without having to take a breath. That's a thought, isn't it? I think I need a little bit of a sip of tea after even thinking about that. Right, it's also believed, like I said, that there was no rain, there was a completely different ecological system. There was a uniform climate, a tropical one. Bizarrely enough, later we'll see Jehovah, he talks about the rainbow being like a new thing, and this is 1600 years after creation. The same with the seasons, when he says about hot and cold. And in Genesis 2:6 it does say, but there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. So can you imagine Noah saying it's going to rain? It's going to rain. He's really gone mad. For a start, he's righteous, and you know how peculiar God's people are to the world. Next thing he's saying, there's going to be rain, it's going to be rain. And next thing he's building this 450-foot boat, and his kids are doing it. They must be thrilled to God. What's he done to them? So this is the poor predicament that Noah found himself in. Now, it's also believed yet that there was a canopy around the earth. I don't know if you've heard this as well, a water canopy. You can get the idea from Genesis 1:6-8. Interestingly, Psalm 148 verse 4 says, praise him, ye heaven of heavens, and ye waters that be above the heavens. Right, now in conditions, I love these things where people are that mad, they actually go ahead and do these things. There's a fellow who started growing a cherry tomato plant. So for those who've tried to grow tomatoes, check this out, this is great. What he did was, if there was a water canopy, it would have basically diffused out the ultraviolet light, right? So what he did was he created the same conditions, right? So this cherry tomato plant gets sunlight, but it doesn't get the UV. And he increased the carbon dioxide, because obviously we had an increased atmospheric pressure back then. His cherry tomato plant currently is 34 foot tall, and every year it yields 30,000 tomatoes. That's quite impressive, isn't it? There you go. So pre-flood, the earth would have been rich, abundant with life. Are you with me? And when you hear these tales of Noah, 953, when he decided to go for a job, it all starts to make sense because the conditions were so optimum. Right, another extract from a journal. But before we do, me and JP were laughing last night about, we always text nonsense to each other. And he mentioned badgers, and I said not mentioning badgers, but I will mention beavers. The animals were twice as big then, and they've actually found a beaver that was twice as big as a beaver should be. It's not just beavers either, there's elephants, twice as big elephants and all kinds. Like the Science Journal, which we've got up here, says, biologists have grown supersized dragonflies that are 15% larger than normal by raising the insects from start to finish in chambers emulating Earth's oxygen conditions 300 million years ago. Sorry. John Vandenbroek of Arizona State University, leader of the work, said, this has allowed us to ask the question, how have oxygen levels through the time influenced the evolution of insects? During the Paleozoic era, around 300 million years ago, huge dragonflies zipped around with wingspan dissolvable thought and it stretching more than 2.5 feet, dwarfing modern relatives. Back then, however, the planet's atmosphere had roughly 50% more oxygen than today. So this is actually known to be the case. Now, I'll just quickly, because we can't do this without mentioning a few things, evidence for the flood, because we're all told there's no such thing as a flood. But some people try to make out it was a localised flood. Nonsense. I'm just going to read through a few of these. Yeah. The oldest living organism still alive on Earth today is the Californian redwoods, or sequoias, and bristlecone pines, and they're around 3,000 to 4,000 years old. There's nothing actually older than the date of Noah's flood. Right. The Cretaceous layer, which is found worldwide layer, right, it's only laid down by crushed shells. How did you get crushed shells in a layer all around the Earth? Right, and I've got a graph here for you because there's a worldwide tradition among natives of a global flood, and this should actually shed some light on it. Can you see? Basically what you've got along the top is a list of all different civilizations. Down the side you've got a list of all the things that are listed as accounts in the scriptures, and you can see when it's marked in how they tally up. So all the way across the world there are stories that tally up with the Genesis account of the flood. If we move on, according to current archaeological evidence, civilization appears to have originated in the Ararat, Babylon region. Right, so the geological records of many of the European kings can be traced back to Japheth, son of Noach. Well, that's quite bizarre. An analysis of population growth statistics confirms that there was zero population at the estimated time at the end of the flood. This indicates the global demise of humans by Noah's flood. Paleontological evidence indicates that the Earth had a very warm, humid climate. This is consistent with the destruction of the old atmosphere by the process of a global flood described in Genesis. The glacial period started very quickly. This would require a cataclysmic event such as a global flood to trigger such a rapid climate change. Studies show that much of the world's folded beds of sediment have no compression fractures, indicating that they were contorted while they were still wet and soft. For this to occur on a global scale, on sediments thousands of metres thick, it would have required a catastrophic global flood. Rocks of different geological ages have similar physical features, indicating that they could have been created by a single worldwide event, such as a global flood. There is an absence of physical evidence that indicates a time change between rocks of successive ages. Sedimentary rock layers worldwide appear to have been laid down very quickly as by a global flood. And globally, there is an almost complete absence of any evidence of animal and plant root activity within the tiny layers of sediment. Slowly deposited layers should show this activity. Flood deposits wouldn't. Then you've got polystrata fossils, which is like trees that go through rock layers that they say were laid down over millions and millions of years. Nonsense. Whales found in the desert. Whale bones found in the desert. And shells found in the Himalayas. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Now, if you want to get scientific, you have to make sure that you get real science, because Satan only gives accolades out to those who stick to his agenda. Right, and all the bogus scientists get the plaudits, the airtime, the columns, the peer-reviewed journals, and it is a very real conspiracy to wipe out all evidence that suggests that the scriptures are accurate. Anything that would destroy evolution is basically shunned and gets no airtime at all. Reasoned thinking basically is mocked. If you look in 1 Timothy 6:20-21, it says, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, evade profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called, which some professing averred concerning the faith. Grace be with thee, amen. So, there's a warning there against false science. If it was a warning that we should heed, then it's definitely one we should heed now. And then in 2 Peter 3:5-6 it tells us this, for this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So, people are not just ignorant that there was a flood, they're also, I believe, willingly ignorant, right, of the fact that judgment's coming again, and that unless they learn to shema the voice of Jehovah, there won't be a place for them on the ark. Now, I just want to ask, Jehovah asked Noah, right, to build a 450-foot long ark. That's quite an undertaking, isn't it? What is he asking you to do? I just put down a couple of questions. Is he saying anything to you? Are you listening to his voice? When he says, do this or don't do that, are you hearing and obeying? Or are you like the people back in the days in Noah who were too preoccupied with the wickedness of the day? If he says, don't watch that or don't listen to that, do you heed what he says? Do you turn away? If he says, follow me, do you just sit there with a dumb look on your face like a teenager who knows best? Or do you? Do you think you're doing just great as you are? Fine. Good. You say to him, not now. Well, it doesn't really apply to me, does it? And what is he asking you to build in your life? What is he asking you to do with your life? What is it that he's asking you to do? Best to find out, best to do, isn't it? Because he calls us all to walk after his ways. He calls us all to follow the example of Noah. The story's in there for a reason. It's not just in there because it happened and it's historical. It's there for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is so that we look at it and go, hang on a minute. Because just as he said to Noah, I'm going to destroy a lot of it. Right? Judgment is coming. It happened. It actually happened. People forget this. They think it's just a story. It actually happened. One day Noah was sitting there going, is this really going to happen? The next thing it was happening. Like the scriptures tell us, he's coming back again and there's judgment coming again. That is really going to happen. Now you're sat here right now and the Lord's saying, build me something, do something with your life, be obedient. And you can either sit there like the rest of the people who thought Noah was around the twist. Yeah, alright, whatever. Or you can get busy doing what it is that the Lord's asked you to do, because judgment is coming and you really wish you'd have gone in the ark. Seriously. Now, something else that I just thought was just ridiculously fascinating to me put in place is Chinese. Is everybody ready to do a bit of Chinese? We might as well, might we? Look. Okay, this is our first bit of Chinese. Right, Chinese supports the scriptures, ancient Chinese, right? The English term for the garden can be represented by the Chinese word Chao, Chao. Tried my best to pronounce it properly. Which is the symbol that's shown below. I told somebody the day, I did actually once learn some Chinese for a fella who was a care worker. And he could only speak one word in English. Sugar! Sugar! So he put sugar in his tea. I thought, oh, that's sad. He's lived here 5 years. I thought, I'll make the effort, I'll try and learn some Chinese for him. And I did. I learned this expression in Chinese, which means, hello, and how are you? I thought, that would really cheer him up if I go in and I say it to him. And he was a miserable man, he was. There used to be a cop in Hong Kong, and I got told by people in the market who could speak Chinese, he's not a very nice man. Not very nice. And I went into his flat. I used to have to clean it up. And I went in and I said, "Hey, Hossa!" And he just looked at me. And that was all I got. I thought, oh, that's just miserable. But we'll crack on anyway. By garden, the Chinese symbol, it's 4 irrigation channels within an area of land. Or maybe, right? Maybe it's the 4 rivers with a tree in the middle of it. Now we know there was 4 rivers, don't we? In the scriptures in Genesis. Right, if we crack on with this, it is of interest to note that the Chinese symbol for prohibition is the combination of the symbols for 2 trees and a command. And you see that up there, yeah? Prohibition is 2 trees and a command. Right, crack on. Some of these are just bizarre. So to prohibit, it should be noted that while he originally prohibited the 1 tree, actually eventually the 2nd tree, the tree of life, was prohibited from that as well. Now, it's also of interest that the Chinese symbol for fruit is the combination of the symbols for the tree in the garden. We've got that. Now, while Adam and Eve were in the garden, the devil decided to implant his plan to alienate humans from God. His plan was to suggest that God withheld secret information for the humans in the garden. Now, the Chinese symbol for the devil is composed of the characters for a secret person in the garden. Can you see it? Yeah? Now, sadly, Eve believed the devil, and she decided to benefit from the fruit of the tree that was prohibited. Notice the Chinese symbol for the Chinese word, Yan, which is the word for desire or greed, and it's a combination of the symbol for the woman and the 2 trees. You see that? I like this. Now, note that the Chinese symbol for being naked has to do with clothing. A tree, which is the one Adam and Eve were originally told not to eat from, perhaps, and a garden with 4 irrigation channels. Can you see that? So what happened? It is basically the story, isn't it? The tree in the garden, they shouldn't have eaten it. They end up naked. Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden. They had children. One of their sons was Abel, who raised and sacrificed sheep. It tells us in Genesis 4:24, it says, Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock and of the fat of their land, and Jehovah respected Abel and his offering. Now, the Chinese character, have a look what it's made for righteousness. It's a sheep, a hand and a lance. So, sacrificing a sheep is what made him righteous. Okay, now if we take that forward, in the New Testament, the account of Abel refers to the blood of righteous Abel, so he was righteous. Now notice how the Chinese symbol agrees with the New Testament account, that essentially it was the sacrifice of the sheep by Abel, for example, that made him righteous. But Yeshua is our Passover lamb sacrificed for us. It's through him that we attain righteousness. Now have a little check. If you get the word for hand and lance and put it together, it's the word for us. So if we have a look at this, the word for righteousness is the sheep plus us. So we're righteous, you with me? Only because of the sacrifice of the lamb, which is a bit bizarre, isn't it? And getting back to Noah, the Chinese word is a type of boat, right? And it's representative of 8 mouths on a boat. Now that's a common word in Chinese for a boat. I just think that's quite bizarre. There's loads, but that'll do us for now. But let me have a look. What time is it now, JP? Okay, should we have a quick break? Have a quick break and then we'll come back do the rest of it. Okay. What?
Just moves, Charlie.
You don't have to redo that bit again as well. Oh, you're away. We're away! We're back on the air. What a thought I mean. Chapter 7, we're going to crack on. It says, And the Lord said unto Noah, Come down all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female. Of fowls also of the air by sevens, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. So the idea of clean and unclean animals was obviously already in place long before Sinai. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. Again, Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. Now notice he's been given the 7-day warning, hasn't he? He doesn't run out and try and evangelise everybody. He just does what the Lord tells him to do. He gathers his family, he obeys. Basically it's saying it's actually not our job to save the whole world, it's our job to hearken to his voice. If he sends us out to evangelise, then we'll go out and do it. But our job and our priority is always just to listen to his voice and to do what it is that he says that we're to do. We should be more concerned with walking righteously before him. That's actually how we shine as a light. That's how we spread the good news. That's the most powerful way we do it anyway. And he brings to us the ones that he wants. Now 2 Peter 2:4-5 says, But if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. These are the fallen angels that we mentioned before who came onto Mount Hermon. They get cast down into chains of darkness. Verse 5 says, And spared not the old world, but saved Noah the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. So, Noah was a preacher of righteousness. I would say that by his act of obedience, he was a preacher of righteousness. By the fact that he built a 450-foot ark, that says a lot, doesn't it? But also, I would probably suggest that he also proclaimed the word of God and was a preacher of righteousness in that sense as well. For some say the 120 years that it took for him to build it. And I'd say that he's still preaching now because his message, we still read about it, and what he did and his actions still speak to us this very day. But I would also point out that Noach was probably the worst preacher in the world because he preached for 120 years and he didn't get a single convert. That's really rubbish, isn't it? We think we're not doing very well. We've actually matched him today, haven't we? We haven't been going 120 years. But yeah, he's the worst preacher ever. Oh, sorry, no. He just gets a hard time, doesn't he? He's not. But notice also, he was warned. 7 days. It didn't come as a surprise to him because he walked in the light. Are you with me? There's coming judgment. It wasn't to him like, whoo! He got told, he knew when it was coming. Verse 6 says, And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And Noah went in, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls and of everything that creepeth upon the earth, there went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah. Right. I would suggest that if I'd have seen this, you know, if I was one of these people who had been deriding Noah, and all of a sudden there's all these animals. Can you imagine? All the vegetation getting eaten and all trampled down, and the noise of them, the stink of them all coming past. They'd all be thinking to themselves, whoa, what's happening here? You know that loony who's built that 450-foot boat? Have you seen what's happening? All these animals are going up there. You'd think, wouldn't you, that they'd at some point go, maybe we'd better get in with this crazy guy and see what's happening. But they don't. They just don't do it. See, the call went out to them as well. The call went out to the people. But they didn't come. They didn't come. And that actually reminds me of a poem that my dad once read to us when we was a kid, and I just thought I'd share it with you because it did tickle me. I don't know why it tickles me, but it does. Smarty, smarty, gave a party. Nobody came. Smarty, smarty, gave another party. Just the same. That's the end of the poem, it's just different. Some people have pointed out that Jehovah didn't need an ark, or he didn't need a man or anything, because he could have just breathed life again. Didn't need to put all the animals on a boat, he could have just created new animals. But he put the animals on the boat for Noah's sake, because he didn't want Noah surrounded by death. He wanted him surrounded by life and the promise of life. And I think that's quite a nice notion. Verse 10 says, and it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. Right. The flood through the Hebraic eyes is an end to cruelty, an end to violence, an end to perversion, an end to the oppression of the weak, and an end to this rampant demonic activity. It's a time for a new start. It was redemptive, because Jehovah isn't a mad scientist intent on killing everybody in the world. He's the giver of life, not of death. He was doing what a surgeon does when he removes a tumour and a cancer. That's what he was doing, and he was creating something where there was hope. Now in verse 11 it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month and the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Right, I'll just very briefly explain what people have suggested was going on. This idea of a canopy around the earth, some people believe was ice, and they believe what could have happened is a huge meteor could have hit this canopy, smashed it, bringing it down. Now, what would have happened as well is if the meteor could have hit the earth, right, and caused it to be tilted on its 23-degree axis, thus giving us the seasons which were not there before the flood. Also, if this meteor comes down and hits the earth at such force, the earth's crust, where it was weakest, would have cracked. Now it's believed that underneath the plates of the earth, as a sort of like hydraulic suspension-y type effect going on, that there was water underneath these plates, if you get me drift. Now if what we've got happening here is the crust of the earth is cracked in certain places, when it talks about the fountains of the great deep being opened, if you imagine the weight of a mountain, yeah, pressing down on the earth's crust, if there was water underneath and basically a fissure, a crack appears in that crust and there's water underneath, the pressure that would be on that water would cause it to shoot up with incredible force. Now I don't want to go into all the ins and outs of it, but people actually reckon that the water would have shot up into the air, and estimates range from between 20 to 30 miles into the air. So when it talks about the fountains of the great deep breaking open, this isn't, see, people just said it rained a lot. It didn't just rain a lot at all. This is a much more serious thing that is going on. The temperatures on the earth would have been completely screwed up as well. The winds would have howled at ridiculous speeds. The people who were left on the earth would have been faced with things that they would have had no idea of, no concept of before. Rain they hadn't seen before, they wouldn't have known about that. The earth itself would have been shaking, completely shaking. The whole of the foundations of the deep, jets of water flying up into the air 20 to 30 miles, also releasing toxic gases. Then, I mean, if you think about it, even the winds in themselves could probably have wiped out most of mankind on the planet. But this is what was going on. You know, you read it, oh, it rained a lot. Now hang on, this was catastrophic beyond belief. This was insane what was going on here. It says in verse 12, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and the sun. See, everything in the scriptures is understated, isn't it? God created the heavens and the earth. If it was me who'd done it, I'd be like, way, to make a big deal of it, you know. Everything's understated. The rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In the self-same day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them into the ark. They're safe, then the judgment comes. There's a picture in that for us as well. And then it says in verse 14, they and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they that went in, male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. Interesting as well. And he wasn't just closed, he was sealed in. Nobody gets in, and nobody gets out. The die is cast. Just imagine the moment. Imagine you're sitting on this 450-foot boat, teeming with animals. You know something's happening. I reckon you could have sensed it in the air. Can you imagine? You're there with your family. The Lord said, get aboard. You're basically saying goodbye to everything you've ever known. You do not know what is going to happen. You've never seen rain before. You do not know what is coming. All you know is something serious is going to happen. It's going to wipe out everything you've ever known. And you're sitting there with your family who are all looking to you. Imagine if you know it, going, looking for some kind of a reaction from you. And then the door starts to move. Can you imagine sitting there on that boat? And as the door lifts up, the light in the room changes and gets dark. Can you imagine that sense? The animals start making that noise and getting all restless the way they do, and they know something's not right. And then you start hearing thunder. Can you just imagine sitting there thinking, what is going on? This is real, this really happened. And he would have been sat there with his family thinking, what is that? Now imagine him praying with all his heart. That'll be us one day. In that position, oh God, please, spare us, save us, Lord. Be with us, keep us safe. That will be us one day. Yeah? Get right with him right now. Don't wait. Now, I just think it's fascinating. The verse 17 says, and the flood was upon the earth 40 days, and the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lifted above the earth. Like I said, just as it was prophesied, it came to pass. The Lord's not like man, he's not a liar. Now, we'll read on. It says, the waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went up in the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth. And all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. And all the flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beast and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man. All in whose nostrils is the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land died. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. Little note here, what did they talk about? What are you going to do? You're sitting there on the boat. They haven't got iPads and tellies and all that. They haven't got them kind of distractions. I know they've got a lot of animals to look after. But what did they say? You know, at the end of the day, they're sitting there. What are you going to talk? Do you remember Fred? I quite liked him. I know he was a bit of an idiot. But what are you going to... Well, he's gone, hasn't he? He's dead. What you talking about? It's just nothing. Do you remember when we used to go? That's gone. Oh, yeah. Well, he had windows. He had a window, didn't he? I think it says that he had to make a window. But it wouldn't have been the most wonderful conditions, would it? So I have no idea how we got by. But just have a think. What can you conceive your life without modern day comforts? All the things, the conveniences, the entertainment of the Western world. What is it now? I don't even know what the big thing is now. Is it Strictly or whatever it is? I don't know. I've been dancing in the kitchen, you know. I don't know why. In my socks. Somehow if you dance in the kitchen in your socks, you think you're dead good. As soon as you put your shoes on, you lose your magic power. I don't know. There that reminds me. Yeah, I was just going to say as well, is who you are as a person defined by the environment or the social relationships and the conventions which you immerse yourself in? Is that the case? Is your walk with God dependent upon operations, programs, or religious organisations, or upon the teaching of a pastor? Is your ability to experience Jehovah's presence dependent upon a worship leader or a group of talented musicians or singers? That's really sad if that's the case, isn't it? I'd rather be like David, who had a personal relationship, because when trouble came for him, Psalm 121 says this: I lift up my eyes to the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help comes from Jehovah, the maker of heaven and earth. Not from some man, not from some big fancy, oh, they got me feeling good about myself. No, from the Lord, yeah. Now, just try and think about the fear that they felt on the ark when these waves were knocking about. Imagine it, tsunamis like you can't imagine. Can you imagine the psychological fallout as well of knowing that all civilization is gone, all the people, everything, and they're all dead? And also thinking, I've got to start from scratch when this is all over. And what will be left? This is, these people on the ark, they went through a lot, didn't they? Now the word that we've got in English as flood is mabul. It comes from the verb root in Hebrew, yaval, which means he carries or he brings. Now, this gives it's more interested not in the water, but on what the waters are doing and what they're bringing. Now, if we look at the consonants of the Hebrew word mabul, we get a bit of a story. It tells us, talks about the flowing waters, which is the letter mem, carrying the remnants of man's household, the bait, which brings about, which is the vav, connects it to the correction of the direction of man upon the earth, which is the lamed, which is the shepherd's crook. So, this is what the flood was to do, it was to bring about the correction of man's direction on the earth. Because as we read earlier, everything was corrupt and the earth was full of violence. The flood was to bring a change to all that. And in many ways it's been likened to the mikveh, or the baptism. It was like the flood was the baptism of the earth. It was a spiritual renewal. It was a total immersion of the earth in water, which represented bringing it to a new beginning. And actually, everything that we read about Noah's story in the flood is like the creation story all over again. Because as we know in the creation story, the earth was without form and void, it was covered with waters, and God was above the waters. Now the flood was bringing rebirth and it was bringing hope. Because as I said before, his plans are always redemptive and not destructive. And even Messiah said this, John 12:24, most assuredly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains by itself alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. Sometimes we forget to look through things through the eyes that Jehovah has. Now, chapter 8 says, and God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters returned from off the earth continually, and at the end of the 150 days the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Okay, before the Exodus and the Passover, the first month of the year was Tishrei, right? That's when we celebrated the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement and Tabernacles. That was the first month of the year. So when it talks here about the 7th month, it's actually talking about, which is quite bizarre, and it talks about the 17th day, the 7th month, it's talking about the Feast of First Fruits. How bizarre. Now, as well, because the way the Feast of First Fruits works, it could actually occur on a different date, because it's dependent on which day of the week we're talking about. This happens to be the same as when Yeshua was crucified. Yeah, it's the same number of days after Passover. So it's like a 2,000-year early anniversary of when Yeshua was resurrected. Now what happened when Yeshua resurrected was, it was like saying, we've conquered death. Yeah, so this is a picture of that again. Now, we'll move on. The waters decreased continually until the 10th month, and in the 10th month of the first day of the month, were on top of the mountains was seen. And I've mentioned to John earlier that the runoff of the water would have been what created a lot of the valleys that we see today. And there's lectures, you can check out some of these lectures on the net, which explain it in all its fantastic detail. It says, and it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the face of the earth. Now, in the Hebrew you get this, but you don't get it in the English. When it says he sent forth the raven, the Hebrew basically means he expelled the raven, he kicked him out, he booted him off the ark. When it talks about the dove, it's all nice. Oh, they sent him, he's lovely. Sent him off with the paddle. But the raven was just kicked out, like, get out, it's not a bit. Now, the raven, bizarrely enough, bear in mind the ark is the source of life and rebirth. The raven is an unclean bird. Anything unclean in the scriptures is to do with death. So there's a picture there as well, isn't it? Right? Now, the date that he was sent forth as well, which is odd, is the 10th of Av, which is the day after the 9th of Av, which, if you look through scriptures and look through history, is a really bad day, if you're Hebraically minded. Yeah, it's the day of the destruction of the first and the second temples, and loads of bad stuff happened. It was the same day the sin of the spies, and they came back and said, "The big, we came and fight them," and the Lord got angry. The 9th of Av is a very bad day, and it always has been. The raven got sent out the day after. The raven is a carrion bird which picks the bones of the dead. So there's a connection that people make with that. Now, also notice what happens. We don't get told anything more about the raven. All we're left with is this image of the raven. Basically, what does it do? It wanders about to and fro on the earth because it's got nowhere to go, has it? So this unclean bird wanders about to and fro. Now, in Revelation 18:2, we're told that evil spirits are likened to unclean birds. So this unclean spirit is going about, roaming to and fro about the earth. And in Job 1:7 and 2:2, we're told that's exactly what Satan does. He wanders about to and fro about the earth. In 1 Peter 5:8, we're told he prowls around the whole earth like a roaring lion looking for those to devour. So this picture of this unclean raven just sent out, wandering about to see what it can find to and fro about the earth, is like almost like this picture of Satan and his hordes of evil spirits. As I say, the dove gets sent out next. Lovely. Send the dove. Send the little dovey, it's lovely. That's all completely different. So, in verse 8 it says, also he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand and took her, lovingly, and pulled her unto him into the ark, and he stayed yet another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came into him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. So no one knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. And he stayed yet other 7 days, and sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more. Right? Interesting this, because the dove in scripture signifies the Ruach HaKodesh. In all the Gospels, but in Luke 3:22, just to pick one, it says this, and the Holy Ghost descended in bodily shape like a dove upon him. And a voice came from heaven which said, Thou art my beloved Son, and thee I am well pleased. So let's have a little look. The dove got sent out 3 times, yeah? First time, it's just like the Spirit of God hovering above the face of the deep in Genesis 1:2, the Spirit, because it represents the Ruach HaKodesh, right? But also there's a picture here. The earth was full of sin, and it found nowhere to rest, nowhere to alight, right? Bear in mind that the flood waters also represent this death. Like, you know, when you're baptised and you go in, it represents dying to yourself. It represents cleansing. Right, the second time, the dove does find a place to put its feet, right? Because it manages to get its feet down so it can pluck off this olive leaf, right? This tender shoot that is torn off. And I think it's interesting, the language here for plucking off this olive leaf is the same language for plucking off what we get in Isaiah 56, where it says, I gave my back to the smiters and my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair. I hid not my face from shame and spitting. Right, this is a picture of our Messiah. Now, olive leaves are very bitter, really. You don't want to eat them. Now, remember that the olive leaf, the olive tree rather, speaks of Israel. So this bird, which represents the Holy Spirit, finds somewhere to alight, yeah? Somewhere that sin is not abounded, basically. But the dove finds something that is bitter, right? Now, Yeshua is the only one upon the Ruach HaKodesh would find rest without the impediment of sin. Okay? So we've got a picture here of the Spirit being able to alight itself in this one place. But this experience is bitter, and this speaks of the suffering servant, Yeshua's first advent. Right? Now, interesting as well is the fact that sages say that this olive leaf actually came from the Mount of Olives. Now, what's bizarre is this isn't beyond the realms of possibility, because the ark actually rested finally in Mount Ararat, which is really quite close to the Mount of Olives. And I found this fascinating as well. In the Targum, the Mount of Olives has another name, and it's actually called the Mount of Messiah. Well, there you go. Now, the third time the dove was sent out, right, the Spirit can now come unabated on all those who've been cleansed. The earth's been cleansed, isn't it? The waters have abated, and it's been declared righteous through faith. This is a picture of Acts 2, when the Spirit could come and basically rest upon the earth. Yeah, obviously at first it was just on Yeshua, but that was bitter because he had to be crucified. Then we get in Acts 2, the Spirit comes freely. The bird didn't come back. Now in verse 13 it says, "And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. But even after the water stopped pouring, it took a further 3.5 months before the waters even receded enough for the ark to strike the ground, and another 3.5 months after that. 7 months after the rain had stopped, before Noah and his family could leave the ark." I think it all adds up to a year and 10 days. And it's believed the first month before the Exodus and the Passover, like I said, was Tishri. And it's believed that this actually happened on the 1st of Tishri, which is the Day of Trumpets, which is also known as the Day of Breathing. And it's also believed to be the day that man was created. Now, also bear in mind that at this point, because we've got dry land, this unclean bird will no longer be roaming to and fro. It will have settled on it. Now, in the second month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, was the earth tried. He doesn't leave just yet, though, does he? But can you blame him? Can you imagine him on the ark thinking, what's out there? For all we know, it's full of dead bodies, or some people who've survived, who've gone away and want to get. They don't know what's out there, do they? And given that the Lord said this would happen, and it happened, they're all sitting inside, basically waiting to be told by the Lord, not going anywhere unless he says so. So he does. In verse 15 it says, "And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife and thy sons and thy sons' wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply upon the earth. And Noah went forth, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar." Bear in mind, this isn't pagan sacrifices. Pagan sacrifices were done to appease the gods, right? And their bloodthirst and their bloodlust. And they were done to keep these gods at bay, keep them far away. We don't want them coming near us, we'll just kill things and keep them, be happy and they'll leave us alone. This is completely the opposite. We've got burnt offering. The Hebrew is actually korban olah, which is much more descriptive of what's going on. And it actually means to approach in order to ascend. Now, the animal which was substituted for a man desiring to, this is what was going on, was to express his total submission and his longing to commune with Jehovah, and it was burned completely on the altar. Now, how did he learn about it? He learned about it because he walked with the Lord. That's how he learned about it. Now, Romans 12:1 says, "I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present yourselves, your body as a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service." Now, we're not bringing burnt offerings and sacrificing them, are we? Romans tells us what we're to bring, ourselves as living sacrifices. Now, bearing in mind that the Lord's provided for us an ark. His name is Yeshua. We've got a lot to be grateful for and a lot to be thankful for, and we should, just as Noah did, we should come expressing our desire to be completely burnt up on that altar before Him. Now, maybe if we do behave like that, we'll get an insight like Noah gets here, because we actually get to read what was in Jehovah's heart. It says in verse 21, "And the Lord smelled a sweet savour, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done." While the earth remained, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. This is the introduction of cold and heat, and of the seasons that we know now. There's no mention of it before then. So we've got poor Noah, he's looking and he's thinking, my goodness, the world's turned into a strange place. Also, what you'll notice as well is now the lifespans will drop off massively. But if you can imagine, Noah lived for 300 years after even the flood. And you know, we get the Greeks talking about the immortals. They probably would have looked at the likes of Noah and that and seen them as immortals, because at 600 years old he still managed to outlive people. Are you with me? It's like, will he just go on forever? It's one of the immortals. You can get where they get the idea from, couldn't you? Now, chapter 9 says, "And God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth." It's exactly the same as creation stories again. And there's a study on that which I saw by Rabbi Foreman, which is fascinating, but it'll take forever to go into. Verse 2 says, "And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that move upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as the green herb have I given you all things. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man." With the Holy One there are always boundaries to your appetites, because our appetites are never allowed to become our God, right? And I heard somebody once say, the stomach is a very good servant, but a terrible master. That's probably right, isn't it? The thing that's interesting here is, as well as there's a recognition that the life of the flesh is in the blood. Now, scientifically, we know this to be the truth, but also there's this allusion to the fact that it means your spirit is the ruach, isn't it? Is in the blood as well. Now, some people say it means you can eat anything, you can eat whatever you want, you can eat. That means you can eat unclean animals, but it doesn't really, because if there was only 2 of every kind of the unclean animals, if you ate one, it wouldn't be able to be produced. It wouldn't make any sense. 6 says, "Whosoever sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. And you be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. And God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying," right, unto this point, Noah's sons have just had to go on Noah's revelation. They actually get spoken to themselves now. Bear in mind, we're all sons of Noah, because we all come from him, don't we? So this actually applies to us as well. We're subject to this covenant. He says in verse 9, "And I behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you, with every living creature that is with you, the fowl of the cattle, and of every beast of the earth with you, for all go out from the ark to every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth." This is the first mention of rain. He doesn't say, "No, them things that you're seeing, rainbow." That, when you see that, just think it's all going to be great. This is like a new thing. That's why there was no rain, and also the mists coming up from there. And it says, "And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh, that is upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, This is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. Right? If there isn't a sign, generally speaking, there's no covenant. Right? If it's just words, it doesn't really mean anything. It's the sign or the token that seals this and makes it binding. I find this is fascinating. The Hebrew word where we get sign or token is ot, which is an aleph, a vav, and a tav. Now, it's hieroglyphic, as it were, pictographic form. It depicts the aleph predicts the Holy One being nailed, which is your vav, or otherwise attached to a tree or a doorpost, tav. So the sign is Jehovah being nailed to a tree. That's the pictograph of sign which is in use with the covenant. So we know what the sign of our covenant is, don't we? It was exactly that. It was our God being nailed to a tree. Now, notice that the bow in the sky is pointing away from the earth. You was going to say that, didn't you? I didn't know this before I started looking at it. Ezekiel 1:28 says this: As the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about him. This is like Ezekiel talking about when he sees the Lord. So this is the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord, and when I saw it, I fell upon my face, and I heard the voice of one that spake. It's quite bizarre, isn't it? And there's a messianic passage in Isaiah that suggests that when Yeshua returns in the cloud, it will be as if an arrow has been loosed. And I'll read it to you. Isaiah 49:2 says, And he hath made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand hath he hid me, and made me a polished shaft. In his quiver hath he hidden me. Now remember that the covenant states he won't destroy the earth again by a flood, but Yeshua will come and it will be destroyed by fire. 2 Peter 3:7 says, But the heavens and the earth which are now by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Right, we'll move on quickly. Verse 18 says, And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. Right? People have a go at Noah being drunk. Okay. Can we just, in his defence, right, can we just say, this is not because I used to drink a lot. In his defence, right, it's been argued that the new conditions of the earth would have took him by surprise, right? Like the grapes fermented a lot quicker and took him by surprise, because everything was a bit run down, and he was like, oh my goodness, and it was just a lot stronger than he was expected. But also the atmosphere of the earth was different, wasn't it? So it was like it went to his head quicker. So, you know, in his defence, but also in his defence, there's this thing, isn't it? If you're a survivor, you feel guilty. Why did you pick? Why did I survive? Why me? Why wasn't it Fred? Let's get back to Fred. Why wasn't it Fred? Why did I survive? Guilty. So, thinking about it, he got drunk. I don't really think we should have a pop at him. Because, you know, it's not the worst thing he could have done. He probably was emotionally in some kind of distress, wasn't he? Trauma? Can you imagine it? Everybody's gone. Me. Plus also the oxygen. I just think he gets a hard time. No, why does he? I don't know. And that film, I haven't watched it, but I've heard about it. Never mind. Right. Give him a break. It says in verse 22, And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. That's a bit confusing, isn't it? Is it like he went in and saw them in the buff? It's not that, right? There's some people, there's all kinds of theories about it. Some sages, I'm saying this now, some sages say that Ham actually castrated his father in order to stop him having other kids and diluting his inheritance. Right? I don't think that's true. He must have been seriously pathetic, wasn't he? Not to notice that. Well, yeah, I know. Yeah. Exactly. I don't buy that. Right, fair enough. But interestingly, his father's nakedness, this phrase comes up in Leviticus 18:8. It says, "The nakedness of thy father's wife shalt thou not uncover, it is thy father's nakedness." So in other words, don't go in and have it with your father's wife. It could be your mother, or it might not be. That's your father's nakedness, right? If he slept with his father's wife in their custom, that would have been an act of trying to usurp his father's authority, which would explain why he would go out and tell his brothers, "Oh, I've slept with my mum." It's just insane. You know, it was like saying, "I've taken the place of my father in his marital bed. I will take the place of my father in all other aspects." Right? Now, bear in mind, because we don't know, right? The scriptures, you know, there's always cycles. Like I said, this whole creation account, Noah's account is like the creation account. Well, there's two stories that are linked very closely. That's Noah and Lot. These two stories are linked closely, and we get that because Yeshua mentions the two. In Luke 17, it says this. It says, "And as it was in the days of Noah, shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat and they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, also as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted and they builded." Lot was around at the time of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. These stories parallel each other. Now, what's bizarre is, what we don't know what went on in one story, we know what went on in the other story. What happened to Lot was his daughters got him drunk, right? So Lot's like Noah, both had these cataclysmic events happening. Both get drunk. One, you know, because he was traumatized and the oxygen got to him. And Lot got drunk. But what happened with Lot is his daughters slept with him, so there was an incestual relationship that went on. So we don't know about that in Noah's case, but because the stories are so similar, we can kind of plant that onto Noah's story, if you get me drift, and fill in the blanks. So the suggestion is, that I'm making, I don't know because there's lots of theories, is that Ham went in and slept with his mother, trying to usurp his father's authority, and that's why his offspring were the ones who ended up getting cursed. But I really don't know. It's not that he went in and saw his dad without his underpants on. It's more than that. You get the drift. But there you go. In verse 24 it says, "And Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done unto him." And see, there's other theories which we won't go into. "And he said, Cursed be Canaan, the servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant." From this prophecy here, right, we get the whole history of the peoples of the world. It all developed according to what was said here. Shem gets preeminence in this, by the way, and it's from him that we get the likes of Abraham, and obviously from Abraham we get Israel. Now, it also says that Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. Sounds like converts, and as we saw earlier, Japheth is closely linked with Europe, from Greece to Europe. Now, let me see. Yeah, verse 28 says, "And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. And all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood." Right, that's the normal order that these people are mentioned in. It's usually Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, what we get is, I'm going to skip ahead here, because what we've got is a list of descendants, and it outlines where all the nations of the world come from, but we're not going to go into it all because it's very in-depth. But Japheth gets mentioned first because his descendants are seen to be the most numerous on the earth. Shem, which is the Semitic people from Abraham, they're the fewest people on the earth. Now Ham, he's basically his son was Canaan. We get all the Canaanites from there, but we get the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, the Babylonians, and they're supposed to be the second most numerous, and all these other people who sometimes are called Arabs but aren't quite. But we'll skip ahead because there's a character coming up who's quite bizarre, right? And in verse 8 we hear about him. He's Ham, who's the naughty one, remember? He's his grandson, right? The one who was cursed by Noah. It's his grandson, right? It says in verse 8, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. Now the Hebrew says he became a Gibberim, right? This has been closely linked to the word Nephilim. It's often translated as a mighty one, but there seems to be this link between the two, and some people suggest he began to become a Gibberim. Did he change in some way? All we know is there was something that set him apart from everybody else, because the Nephilim are described as Gibberim, as mighty, and it's not actually known what it is about this character, but he is the first world leader. Now it says in verse 9, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunted before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Kelna, in the land of Shinar. Now his name means rebellion, right? So it's already a bit bad, isn't it? And he was crowned by men, right? But his kingdom is the kingdom of the world, and he's a type of Antichrist, and he's always stood for this Antichrist character. Now it says he was a great hunter, right? And the commentator Rashi says this is not a compliment, because it's referring to the fact that what he was hunting was men's souls and men's allegiance to him rather than to Jehovah. And he was deceptive, and he set up false religions to lead people away from the truth. This is, right, Nimrod. You know about Nimrod, don't you? I want to, we'll mention him a little bit later, but if you bear in mind that Nimrod is still worshipped today, and some people are older than me where most people know, his type has not gone away. We'll skip ahead now to verse 11, because we're going to come up to the story of Tower of Babel. It says, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and dwelt there. And they said to one another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Right, bear in mind, the people were directed by Jehovah to go forth and replenish the whole earth. So they're directly rebelling against what Jehovah's will was. Now in Genesis 6:12 it says that the world was filled with violence. Here the people are united in rebellion. Now, if you consider the descendants of Japheth, right, they're where they became the Greeks, became the Europeans. They're said to be obsessed with beauty. Yeah, which makes sense, because the Greeks were all about, the arts and stuff, and then do bodybuilding and posing naked and do all these things, and statues and that's right, poetry. So that was their kind of their bag. They would have loved this idea of building this city. They would have been swept up with this. Yeah, this sounds fabulous, wonderful. Now, from history we see as well that the descendants of Shem, they were obsessed with devotion to the Lord. They were religious types. This is where we get Abraham and the likes from. They would have been less likely to be caught up in all this. But I want us to get across as well the fact that it says they wanted to make a name for themselves. The people, we were talking about this earlier, a name is not just a name, right? And in them days, a name contains within it the essence of the thing itself. So when it says they wanted to make a name for themselves, what it actually means is that they conceived the notion of deciding for themselves what their own essential nature and character should be. In other words, they're saying, let us be not what God created us to be, but we'll be what we choose to be ourselves. Are you with me? This is what the whole idea of making a name for themselves was. Now at this time, if you imagine this place was a very fertile crescent, these people would have been, oh, this is brilliant, we love it here. They've got all kinds of stuff, right? Food, it's great. They've got this character called Nimrod, who's a great mighty hunter of souls, feeding them full of all this, ooh, do this, and ooh, do this, and wear this, and on a Saturday, just forget that. Sunday, we like Sunday, we worship the sun here. Doing all this, and everybody's going, oh, brilliant. They're building a big tower, right? There's a city that's just appeared, and it's like, wow, we're doing so well, this is brilliant. We're making a name for ourselves. We're doing our own thing, we're all joined together, and it's all lovely. And there's talk of peace and everything. Wow, isn't this fabulous? It's all rebellion against the Lord, right? But they're all thinking everything's absolutely cushy, and this religion, this false religion, is actually making people feel all spiritual and fabulous, like really, really in touch, aren't we? This town is out of it, it's a gateway to God, you know, we're going to do it's brilliant. Everybody's pumped up and thinking this is absolutely fabulous. And it's just a picture, I think, of exactly what's going on today. In the Western world, we're all plumped up. We've all got people telling us our families, you know, and we get a bit fed up, we stick something on the telly, we watch these things, and we can go off and we can hear people preach righteousness to us, but the kind of righteousness that makes us feel good about ourselves, you know what I mean? Nothing that's going to challenge us, nothing hard, nothing that actually tells us, well, actually you should be devoted to Him and what He asks you to be. Not making a name for yourself and doing the things that you think you should be doing and asking Him as an afterthought to bless them things that you're doing. This is exactly what we've got going on now. We've got Nimrods abounding now, telling everybody, oh, it's brilliant, just do this. No, it's alright. Ignore what God's wishes were. Okay, it's okay. This is a bad place to be. This is a really bad place to be. But this is the Tower of Babel. Now, the first cities, generally speaking, are not always good in the scriptures. The first city that was built by Cain, and he was the murderer, wasn't he? It tells us in Genesis 4:17. It says, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Now the thing to remember as well is in our comforts and in all this that's going on, see, people hear about the tribulation and they think that's a terrible thing. What a terrible thing. How could that, you know, tribulation, and they're all suffering like it's never been before. It's actually an act of mercy. It's the Lord shaking people up and saying, you're going to die there. You're going to die with a pizza in your hand, sat in front of the telly, and you'll be lost forever. He's in His mercy, He's shaking people up, and He's telling people, this is real, judgment's coming. That's a God of mercy and a God of love and a God of kindness. And it takes love and it takes kindness, it takes mercy to tell people now to stop slumbering in all these things that they think are keeping them just how they want to be, sadly far away from the Lord. Now, Scripture, basically, all through the history of Scripture, you've got a tale of two cities. One's Babylon and one's Jerusalem. Babylon in all its various forms. One's based on His principles and one's based on man's, which all sound fabulous. Now, man's ideology is basically to give you the impression of spiritual life, whilst basically keeping you from the very source of life. Verse 5 says, and the Lord came down to see the tower, to the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they all have one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they imagined to do. So there's one language and one voice. I just thought this was interesting. Go back to the Chinese. Their word for tower is grass and clay, which is what it was made of. Mankind and one mouth. So they've all got one language. That's the Chinese word for it. Verse 7 says, go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not be understood one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build a city. Right? And they're trying to unite in rebellion once again. Right? The old Babylonian religion, the worship of Nimrod and his wife Semiramis, and the sun Tammuz, and all the sun worship that goes along with it, it's alive and well and kicking today. People celebrate this fellow's birthday, right, on the 25th of December every year, right? And his wife, Semiramis, okay, she died and was reincarnated as Ishtar, and everybody celebrates this at the spring equinox every single year. This is alive and well today. And Tammuz, people weep for Tammuz 40 days. Well, they don't weep, they give things up, right? One day for every year of his life, they actually give something up, and they call it Lent. And then they eat a hot cross bun, which is just a cake with a T on it for Tammuz. Ridiculous, isn't it? Now, what was his biggest sin? Nimrod's biggest sin. The tower reaching to the heavens was an attempt to elevate man and to demote God and to put themselves on equal terms with God. And sadly, his biggest sin was to elevate man from being just a man to try and elevate him to be a God. And that's what the theory of evolution does, sadly. That's where, see, the theory of evolution is what brings us transhumanism, and what brings us this idea of H plus, this horrible idea of this omega point, and we will be as gods. This is what evolution brings you to. You can see where evolution was seeded from, can't you? Now I've got a picture here of the tower. I don't know whether any of you can really make that out. It says Europe, many tongues, one voice, and it's actually a picture of the Tower of Babel. In the picture, obviously not yet complete. You can see what their intentions are, can't you? Like I said, they want to go back and rebuild this thing, because we've never quite got rid of this whole Babylonian nonsense. Verse 9 says, therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. If people can't understand each other, they can't congregate. So because congregations of people were not his will, he took away their ability to communicate with each other. But the good news is, you can reverse it, can't you? But all end up being able to speak Hebrew. That would be good. Now, the Hebraic word picture of Babel actually is a picture of the one actually that is sent to discipline. So, sadly, it's basically Jehovah by name, and it Babel is declared in Babylon to be the location from which he will send forth a people who will discipline his chosen people. This has happened in the scriptures. You see it happen, don't you? You see it with Nebuchadnezzar. But you see it, if you follow it through, this whole concept of Babylon, you take it through, and we won't go into it now, but you'll realise, Mystery Babylon, Catholic Church, these are the people who have always tormented and tortured God's chosen people. Millions of them, if you just look through the history books, millions of them. Not just Jewish people who've actually thought, you know, this whole thing about being a Christian would be so much better if we actually read the Bible and did not attend in the Word of God. Those people were there to this day, crucified, had their children smacked against the walls, horrible things. Now, I find this bizarre as well. The rabbis say that the constellation of Orion is Nimrod's constellation. And Orion means fool. And in Job 38:31, we get this: canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? And I just want to put this in, and it says, our God is more than a match for Nimrod. This is the Antichrist figure, yeah? And his system and his people that have and still do inflict discipline upon Jehovah's people. The head of the world, politically and spiritually, was Nimrod, yeah? One who defied Jehovah with his false religion, Mystery Babylon. Now the head of the world now, both politically and spiritually, is doing exactly the same, but he does it all in the name of humanitarianism and peace. And I think we all know who he is. Now I've got a little bit of a slide here. I think it's interesting. Archaeological evidence found I'll read it out. Iraq, it's Babel today. Mound 6 miles southwest of Hilla called Bears Nimrud. I wonder what that's a reference to. And it says excavation shows a base 49,000 square feet and 300 foot high. This is large enough for it to be the possible remains of an 8-section ziggurat, described as 650 foot high, and a mile square at the base by the Greek historian Herodotus, and reckoned in that day to be very old. It may be the remains of the Tower of Babel that was built by Nimrod at around BC 2200. Now, it goes on, the Torah portion goes on to tell you the descendants of Shem, and it shows how it comes to Abraham. But I just want to finish by mentioning this whole concept of the fact that they're trying to rebuild this Tower of Babel. The world is to see things completely differently. You've had your eyes open, haven't you? Now, what's interesting to me is the fact that the Lord is in charge of everything, right? There's nothing for us to fear. There's nothing for us to worry about. We walk in the light. We've been warned that judgment is coming. We have the scriptures set out before us to tell us exactly what we need to do. Now, you can either be one of the 8 on the boat, or you can be one of the ones who gets swept away. Now, what was the example set? The example set was simple. Trust in the Lord and obey Him. Don't go along with the likes of Nimrod, who try to elevate you and make you feel all good about yourself while you're actually in direct rebellion to the very one you should be bowing before. The only thing that you can really do if you want to save yourself is to listen to what He's got to say and to do it. Noah did all that the Lord commanded him to do. All that He commanded him to do. He didn't go halfway. If he'd have built half an ark, it would have been any use to him, would it? The Lord's looking for people who will bend the knee and with childlike faith just obey what it is that He has to say, because He wants to rescue all of us. So don't be taken in by the likes of these worldly figures in these talks of, oh, peace, oh, love. Anything that takes you away from Jehovah, avoid it at all costs. Be considered peculiar. You thought Noah was round the bend. Well, can you imagine how they felt when the rain started falling? Not good. Should we finish in prayer? Heavenly Father, I thank You for Your scriptures. I thank You that they're a light to us, and I thank You, Lord, that it is Your will that none of us should perish. Thank You, Heavenly Father, that even though things might get frightening, Lord, we always have You to turn to. I pray for everybody here, Lord, today. I pray that we realise the seriousness of that message, which is to bow the knee to You. I pray, Heavenly Father, that You deal with each of us gently. But I thank You that You would chastise us, Lord, when we needed to bring us to our senses. Lord, I just pray that Your name is glorified today. Amen.